Greg, increasingly in today's world, Christian philosophers, traditional Christians, are rejecting the concept of immortal souls and believe that our selves, our essence, is purely physical. They believe in a resurrection, but there's no immortal souls. Do you agree with that?
Well, you're right. There's a number of people who have been arguing this, partly along scientific lines, neuropsychology, and sometimes along philosophical lines, arguing that the idea of a naturally immortal soul comes from Plato, not the Bible. I myself I understand the force of the argument, and I think it's a legitimate option. At the same time, I can't necessarily agree with it. The Bible, the New Testament especially, talks about us being body, soul, and spirit. And in that way of thinking, those are, in the physicalist way of thinking, those are simply like three kind of poetic ways of talking about different dimensions of the human person. And I just don't read it quite like that. It seems to me that there's something more ontological going on in that talk than just, poetic ways of referring to different parts of the human person. There's also a few passages. While the major thrust of hope in the New Testament is the resurrection of the body, and the advocates of this view that you're talking about, would really drive that home. While that is certainly the major thrust, there are a couple of passages that seem to suggest some sort of consciousness right after death. You have the thief on the cross where Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." You have Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, where he says, for me to die is to go to be with the Lord. And then he talks about kind of being naked because he longs to be clothed with his body. It's a strange passage, but it seems to suggest some kind of awareness right after death. And then in Philippians chapter 1, he says something similar to what's better, to die and go to be with the Lord or to stay here with you?
Yeah, now they would have an equally strong repertoire of verses that can be thrown at each other in this verse wars in any doctrine. You
Take this verse.
Right. So we can play that game, but I'd like to look at it more philosophically in terms of the necessity or lack of an immortal soul in a core Christian philosophy.
Yeah. I would have to say that I don't think that there's a philosophical necessity for the natural immortality of the soul that can survive apart from the body. If in fact these folks are right and that when we die we are unconscious, we cease to exist, and then God raises us from the dead, I think the Christian worldview is unaffected.
You're okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
My reasons for disagreeing with it are almost completely exegetical.
And though if you really look at it, the existence or non-existence of us human beings as immortal agents from day one really has some profound implications, I would think.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe I'd have to know what you see as the profound implications. I think what's profound is just the idea that you're going to exist forever. What happens right after death and between death and forever, I don't think as that essential to the Christian worldview.
Well, it would indicate that once God created you as an immortal soul, that you have sort of an independent existence. Now, without that immortal soul, you're, again, even more dependent upon God to have a new creative act or a subsequent creative act to recreate you, if you will.
Yeah, it certainly gives a different nuance to it, but I don't know that anything essential is changed with that. All parties would agree that whether or not I have a soul that can survive the body, whether or not that's the case, my existence is totally dependent upon God. It's just a matter of how you unpackage that belief system. So while I personally hold to the immortality of the soul, it's not an issue that I think that is essential to Christian orthodoxy.
What is the skewing in terms of Christians today, in terms of theologians who believe in the immortal soul or who don't? Is it very much?
Well, my reading of the situation is that it is the traditional view is still the dominant view, at least in conservative Christian circles. But you're right that there are some evangelical Christians as well as others who are now holding to this more monistic position. But it still seems to me that it's largely a minority. And at a popular level, it's almost all.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to put a lot of stock in whatever is said at the popular level on any respect. But I think a good deal of this is based upon current information in neuroscience, and the more we learn about the brain and the mind, there seems to be, pretty much one-to-one correspondence.
I'm not quite sure what to do with the neuroscience issue, because you still do have dualists who are neuroscientists. There are some who are arguing that. In fact, I just read a book about a couple months ago by Jeffrey Schwartz, The Mind and the Brain, where he tries to prove the existence of an independent soul through neuropsychology. It's a fascinating book, and he's a Buddhist trying to show that there's this consciousness thing. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but I'm also not sure how to weigh the neurological evidence versus the exegetical evidence. Those are always tough things to work out.
Well, I don't think you weigh one against the other. You really have to look at each one in their own context, and then
try to come up with some
however
kind of way
you want to synthesize
some way of integrating them.
You come up with your own worldview.
Right.